Hello everyone and welcome to this recording in the Azure Hangout demo series. So this will be a series of demos on how to achieve certain activities in Azure, and I'll also be providing you with links that you can follow. So as this is a demo series, I won't be getting into full details on explanations and clarifications. So I'll try to give a general idea so that what I'm talking about makes some sense to you, but I'll be focusing more on the demo and the lab itself. So I do have other series that I'll be doing where we get into the details. So if you're not familiar with Azure Hangout series, I would recommend that you go check those out because we do try to get into certain details. And I have another series that I do called the Azure Deep Dive series, where I take certain technologies in Azure and I go into a bit more details on them. So in this particular demo, this will be the first part in the governance category, and it will be a basic demo of Azure role-based access control and Azure policy. So what I'll be doing is I'll start out with an Azure subscription that looks something like this. We'll be going through a process of completing the activities in this lab, so these activities. And when we're finished with them, we'll end up with something that looks like this. So that's what we'll be going through in this particular lab series. So it's basically implementing Azure Role-Based Access Control and Azure Policy. And then in the next lab, we'll go into more details. How do we create custom roles? And then in the following one, we'll get into more details on Azure Policy and Azure Initiatives or Azure Policy Initiatives. And then we'll talk about Azure Resource Logs. So essentially talking about different governance categories in Azure. So let's get into that. So first thing that I'll do is we have two exercises that I'll be going through today. So for exercise number one and exercise number two. Exercise number one, I'll be going through these steps. I'll be creating an Azure AD user and group. I'll be creating some resource groups, and then I'll be delegating management of an Azure resource group using role-based access control to the group that I created earlier. And then I'm going to assign an Azure built-in policy to try to govern the types of resources that can be created in the Azure subscription. Then exercise number two will be all about verifying what we did in exercise number one. So first one, let's go to task number one. Let's create an Azure AD user. Yeah, let's create Azure AD users and groups. Remember that what I'm doing here, the instructions will be in the description below so that you can follow with these also. So what will I be doing in this exercise is I'll be creating a user, an Azure AD user account. So let's get the user over here. There we go. And let's get rid of this duplicate. So we'll create a user account and then I'll create a group. And the group will be called Azure Subscription Contributors and the user will be called AAD User01. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding this user to this group. So that's the very first task. So let's go get that done. If I go to the Azure portal, if I go under Azure Active Directory, so let's switch that on. Okay, so in Azure Active Directory, number one, I'll need my DNS name, so I'll copy this. And let's also expand this. And then if I go on the users over here, so on the users, I can go create a new user. And I'll call this user AAD user01. And the username I'll call AAD user01 at the domain name of my Azure Active Directory domain. So I'll just paste that in there. So I'll leave everything else as the default. I'll need the password, so I'll click on show password and I'll copy that into a notepad over here, so because I'll need that later. Now go ahead and click on create. So that's as simple as that. I've created my user. So the next thing is I'll need to go create my group. So I'll just scroll back a bit. I'll go on the groups and I'll go to create a new group. So I'll go new group. And in my new group, I'll create the group type security. The group name I'll call Azure Subscription Contributors. and I'll give it the same description. Membership type, I'll give this assigned, and members, I'll go select the member that I created earlier, which is my AAD user. So select that user, and I'll go ahead and click on select, and that's my user selected there. I'll go ahead and click create, and now I've got my group. So now that that's done, that's that's task number one done. So I have my user created, and I have my user added to a group that I just created. So let's go to task number two. We'll be creating Azure resource groups. So I'll be creating two new Azure resource groups. And what I'll be doing in this particular task is very simple and straightforward. Again, we'll start from the basics and then we'll go to things more complicated as we go through this series. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating two new resource groups in my Azure subscription. Very simple and straightforward. So let's go do that. So back to my Azure portal, I'll go on the resource groups over here, and I'll go to create a new resource group. And for my resource group, I'll call the first resource group AZ01RG, and I'll put this in UK South. And I'll just click review and create. That's my first resource group. So then I can go over here and I can go ahead for the second resource group. This time around, I'll call this AZ02RG, and I'll put this in UK South also. And I'll go ahead and review and create, and that creates my second resource group. So now I've got my two resource groups created. Excellent. So if I go back to the document, all this is all done. So let's go to task number 3 of exercise 1. I'll delegate management of an Azure resource group for a built-in role-based access control. So what I'll be doing over here is very straightforward also. I have this group. I'll need to give this group contributor permissions to this Azure resource group over here. And in Azure, we have some default roles. Some of the ones that we have are the owner, which means you can control everything, but at the same time you can assign permissions. And then following that, we have the contributors. And contributors means you can do everything apart from assigning new permissions. So that's the main difference between owners and contributors. And then you have the readers, which only means you can read, but you cannot modify anything. You can add anything, you can modify anything. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to be adding this group that I created, the Azure Subscription Contributors group. I'm going to be giving them the contributor role assignment to this particular resource group, not to the other one. So just to this one, and then verified that the scope of what members of this group can do is limited to what I've given them access to. So let's get to task number 3 now. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the Azure portal, and I'll go under my resource group, which I'm under resource groups now. I will just select my AZ01RG resource group, and I'll go under access control over here. And under access control, I can go under role assignment. So I can see the existing role assignment there, and that's inherited from the subscription level. So I'll just go ahead and add a new role assignment, and I'll add a new role assignment for the contributor role and to my group, which is the Azure Subscription Contributors group. And then I'll save that. And once that is done, which is done now, so that's task number 3 all done. So let's go back to the instructions that we're following. So that is all done now. So let's go to task number 4, where I'm going to be assigning a built-in Azure policy to an Azure resource group. And the main thing when we talk about policy and role-based access control. So role-based access control, forgive me, role-based access control we can use to define who has permissions to do what. Policy, on the other hand, comes at governance from another angle. Policy defines what can be done, what are the actions that are allowed. So regardless of whether you have the right permissions or not, is this allowed on a much more fundamental layer or not. So you can see that the policy engine from the diagram that I have here is actually core or part of the core Azure Resource Manager. So even before things are judged as to whether you have access or not, things goes through the policy engine first of all. So what I'm going to do in task number 4 is I'm going to be assigning a policy. And my policy will be something that's simple. It's only going to say only this queue. Let's cancel that. Only this queue of virtual machines, standard DS1v2, can be created in this Azure subscription. So that's essentially what I'm going to do. So let me give you like a visual representation of what I'm about to do. So what I'm about to do is I'm about to create this um, policy, and that will be added straight right in the policy engine. That's what you can do. So let's go to the Azure portal and let's go do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this on the resource group level also. So I'm currently on AZ01HG. If I go under policies, and then on the policy, I've got on my policy, if I go on the policy definition, over here I can see the current definitions, and I can filter for skill, so I can see some policies that have the word skill in them or the term skill in them. So allowed virtual machine skills is the one that I want to use. So what I'll do is if I go on the policy assignment over here, and if I go to assign a policy, and I will leave all this and go on the policy definition, and I'll go to select the definition that I showed you earlier. So I'll go search for skill again, allowed virtual machine skills. I'll go ahead and select that. So that's my policy, and that's the assignment name. What I'll do is I'll just modify the description a bit to say allowed virtual machine skills is the standard DS1v2, and that's the person assigning that. And the allowed skill, I'll get a list here that I can select from. So I'll just select the standard DS1v2. So it may take a while because it's going to have to load all the skills in the backend and display them in the portal. So you may find out that you get some delay like I'm getting over here. But eventually it should come up with a list of all the skills. So what I may also do if it's taking a longer time. Oh, okay, so let's go wait. So what I'll do is I'll pause the recording not to waste time. So once it's displayed the list of the skills, I'll resume the recording and then we can just continue with the rest of the process. So that's responding now. So if I go looking for standard DS1v2. So standard DS1v2 over there, if I select that, and I'll leave this unchecked, and if I go ahead and click assign. So essentially what I've done here is I've assigned a policy that only allows that particular VM SKU to be deployed to that resource group. So once all of that is done, the next thing that we need to do is let's go start doing some verification and some validation of what we just did. So the first thing that I'll do is moving on to exercise 2 now, task number 1, I'll identify an available DNS name for Azure VM deployment. So what do I need that for? What I'm about to do now is I'm about to do some VM deployment. So let's give you some visual representation of that. So what I'm about to do is I'm about to submit some VM deployment, and I'm going to have to give them some DNS. The DNS, I'm going to have to give it a unique DNS name, and I want to verify that the unique DNS name that I'm going to be giving this, it's something that's available before I go ahead and do the deployment. So that's what that's talking about. So if I go over here and I go to shell.azure.com, and I'll go ahead and select my default directory, and I'll switch that to PowerShell from Bash. So after that has successfully connected me, I'll go ahead and run some commands. So let's go. Okay, that's done. So here's the command that I'll be using. And again, remember, check the description below for all the instructions of what I'm doing. So test AZDNS availability. That's the name that I'm testing, DOVM009, and the location is UK South. So it's going to check that name and check if it's available. If I see a true, that means it's available. If I see a false, that means it's not available. So for example, if I do that test and I do something like test VM, it may not be available. It could be available, who knows? And you can say that's false. So that means that name is not available to use because somebody else is probably using that already. So I'll just go ahead and use this name that I just verified that it's available. I'll make a note of that. So let's go copy that and I'll make a note of that. Good. Next step. Let's go do the next step. Next step is I'm going to attempt an automated deployment of a policy non-compliant Azure VM as a delegated admin. What does that mean? So two things that I'm going to be doing here. Number one thing is I'm going to log into the Azure portal as this user, this AAD user. I'm going to go log into the Azure portal as this user. And I'm going to verify that when I log into the Azure portal as this user, I only have access to this resource group. I do not have any access to this resource group because I didn't assign any permissions to that. So that's the very first thing that I verify. Number two thing that I'll now verify after doing that is I'll begin to do a deployment. I'm going to try to do a deployment of a virtual machine that has the size of standard A1. Remember that my policy says only allow standard DS1 V2. So if I should try to do a deployment of this particular template, I expect to get a an error. So let's just give you like some nice visual. Hey, again over here, I expect to get an error to say, no, you're not allowed to do this particular deployment. So that's not going to be allowed. So that's what I want to verify right now. So let's go ahead and verify that. So number one, I'll log in as this user, AAD user 01. So let's go to the Azure portal. I just need my domain name. So if I go back to my Azure Active Directory, I'll go copy my domain name. So let's copy that and now open Firefox private window. And once that comes up, we can go through the rest of the process. So okay, so let's go to portal.azure.com and I'll get my username and next, and I'll put in the temporary password that I made a note of earlier. Let's try that. Go away. uh, let's do that again. And sign in, and that should sign me in. No, do not update. Need to get rid of that. Okay, so now that I'm signed in, go maybe later if I go under resource groups, you can see I can only see AZ01. Even though there are many resource groups that are actually present in this subscription, I can only see one because I'm only assigned permission to that one. So now what I'll try to do is I'll try to do a deployment into this resource group as this user. So let's go ahead and do that now. So what I'll do is I'll go to let's go create a resource. I'll go to templates deployment. And I'll go create a new template deployment. So what I'll do is I'll just load a GitHub quick start template and I'll just filter for the 101 VM. Oh, let's do that again. 101 VM simple Linux. So let's look for 101 VM simple Linux. So that's template over there. And I'll go ahead and select, actually, let's go ahead and edit this template. So I want to show you what I'm referring to. So if I go within this template, if I have a look, and if I have a look at the VM size that this template is deploying, let's make this a bit bigger for you to see. You can see that it's hard-coded to deploy the standard A1 VM size, which of course I'm not allowing by policy, but our attempts to do the deployment. So if I go ahead and just click save to this, and then try to deploy it into my resource group, specify a username, specify a password, change that to password. DNS label prefix, the prefix that I tested earlier, and that was good. I'll just copy that and paste that in there. And agree to terms and condition and click on purchase. So there's something else that I missed, but again, maybe that's not necessarily important. So here's one thing that you can see here. You can see this failed. And why did it fail? Because the request was disallowed by policy, and it's pointing to the policy that I applied earlier. So that's all good. So the next thing that I'll need to do now, so now I've just showed you that I tried to deploy this and I got an error message to say that's not allowed. So what I'll now try to do is I'll try to deploy a template that is compliant with my policy. So I'll try to deploy this template. And if I try to deploy this template, this should be allowed. This should go through successfully. But before I do that, I'm just going to register some resource providers over here because I think I missed that step. So let's go ahead and quickly do that. So this is just something that's needed because especially if it's a subscription that you've not deployed anything into, that's when you need this step. I've deployed things into my subscription before, so I really don't need this, but just to give you that, so I'm following the instructions that you'll be following also. So just registering those resource providers. So all good. So now what I'll do again is I'll go to create a new resource group. Oh, sorry, create a resource and do templates, deployment, create my template deployment. This time around, if I go to to load a GitHub quick start template, come on. So once this loads, I'll select the same template, but now I'll modify the VM size to one that's permitted by my policy. So it's taking a while to load up. So what I'll do is again, I'll pause the recording. Once it loaded the list, I'll resume the recording and we can complete the process. So welcome back. So I realized that I made an error over there. So because I was doing that with my admin credentials, which I need to be doing that over here in Firefox. So what I'll do is over here, I'll just go ahead and close this. I'll go ahead and edit this same template. And what I'll be doing here is I'll go on the VM size variable and I'll go to edit this. From standard A1, I'll change that to standard DS1 V2. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll go ahead and save this. Right, standard DS1 V2 with everything else intact. I'll go ahead and click on purchase. And this should now be successful and my deployment is now going through. So now that validates that my policy is working. So I hope that that's giving you like some basic information on working with role-based access control and working with Azure policy. So in the very next demo that I'll be doing in the Azure governance category, We're taking that a step further. We're going to be creating a custom role. So let's not use just the default contributors role. Let's create our own custom role and let's get that applied. And then after that, we'll go into much more details on Azure policy and policy initiatives. And now you can start using that to enforce tagging. Um, and of course, you can expand that into any other scenario. So thanks very much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next recording. Bye.